Hello and welcome, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excellent. Pleasure to be
Uh,
here.
Thank you, thank you. So for some reason, I wrote here that you're a pharmacist, but you're not a pharmacist, are you?
Not by any stretch of the imagination.
So how did you start
There was
your
no chemistry. There was no chemistry or
no
biochemistry.
chemistry in chemistry?
No. The only kind of chemistry I deal with is in terms of my relationship coaching or psychotherapy. So yeah.
So chemistry is really important, and for some reason, I mean, for me, I found chemistry really boring in school,
Hmm.
and yet when I'm with people, there's always a kind of chemistry, so to speak. Does it work? Does it not work? Were you that kind of person as well, sort of growing up, that you're looking for
Um,
chemistry?
Very much always a people person. The youngest of five siblings, so really social household I was brought up in. So yeah, and around an extremely large peer group as well. So yeah, I think I've always been a people person, not knowing what I wanted to do necessarily as a child in primary school or secondary school, but always a man of the people with the people. Yeah,
And did you grow up here in the UK, or were you elsewhere?
yeah. For my sins, I'm a Londoner through and through.
North, south?
South.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean,
That's
I
that's
was,
with that's with a th and not with a f, as we usually say in our unprofessional circles. South London, but actually from
yeah,
South London.
South London. I spent how many years did I spend there? I spent 4 years there. I was in Tooting Bec,
Yeah. Okay. All right.
and
Yeah.
I went to Ernest Bevin School, which was a pretty rough school at the time, back in the early 80s. And he just got on with it. That was the kind of ethos that I had at the
Pretty
time.
much. That sounds like the ethos of the early '80s. Kind of just suck it up and crack on.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
and when did you kind of find your way, that you realized that this is what I wanted to do?
Pretty late actually, because I was training in the mid '90s to become a lawyer. Actually, I was in law school, and I found out that I spent an awful lot of time in the psychology section, taking out books when I had law assignments to complete, um, and just being fascinated by the whole psychology thing. And on top of that, I used to listen to I'm going way back now. So back in the mid '90s, these audio tapes from America, and there were these African American psychologists, Naim Akbar. One of them was Wade Nobles, which I heard less of, and also Amos Wilson. But particularly Naim Akbar, there were these, there's just these insightful, very well organized, very well constructed arguments and postulations about psychology and healing and transformation that you should just have just kind of spellbound by them, like quite gripped. And so eventually, working in a custodial setting, and I was working in HMP Feltham safeguarding. Well, nice name safeguarding, but I actually worked on what they called, the section of it was Suicide Watch. And I got a chance to, and it's a very much, without having a formal training, but it's very much there's a counselor type element to the job, risk assessing and kind of building these relationships and things of that nature, and building rapport, and kind of talking these young people through their stresses and their crises, managing the crises. So I got a chance to do a 6 week course in counselling. Just like we've got a little budget. There's you can go on the course, get out of work for half a day, and from the first session it was hooked in, locked in, and I think that's when I knew at that point this is what I want to do.
And in terms of psychology, I mean, what was it about psychology? I mean, you mentioned a few things that, everything was, they had great arguments and they had great ways of formulating um, ideas. But what was it about psychology that really switched you on?
Um, Being a people person, always been a people person. I just think I at the time just to think that they seemed, the psychologists that I would read, or particularly the ones I would listen to as well. Um, they seemed to be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of their arguments. because like I mentioned, there were these African American, in particular, psychologists, and so I was listening to information from that world, a kind of like a liberation or a kind of socio-political consciousness, and but their arguments as clinical psychologists seem different to activists or people that were very passionate, meant well, trying to make transformation, but were just they're just that like passionate, maybe well read in history, maybe some of them maybe even professional historians, other academics, but this particular discipline, psychology, represented like a systematic way of approaching problems and impacting transformation, human transformation, self-development, these kind of things. So
And
really
and
spoke
and
to me.
and was that your sort of central ethos when you were working with the young offenders?
Yeah,
Transformation.
the power of transformation. I think one of my heroes is El Hajj Malik Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X. And one of the things about his story is the transformation, is that this is like a, you know, person that lived on the fringes of, of civility, and living by his wits and living in a different world. And just by the power of his will and just by motivation and having good counsel and instruction, but the power of the human being to transform themselves or to be transformed into, like reinvent themselves in a really kind of like fundamental way, not in a superficial way, not talking image consultancy, but like a kind of core level, change their direction. I've always found that like very fascinating, very moving, and just something that I've that pulls me in, and even to this day. I mean, that I spoke about back in the mid-90s, but even to this day, there is always that. It never gets old. It's always a new theory, a new idea, a new thing that's in the world of psychology or human development or self-development that always there's always something that I find stimulating.
And was there someone in real life that you were in contact with that did that to you? Transformed
Um,
you inside, truly, deeply.
I don't know if there was any person, a particular person, but there were influences and different people that were around that encouraged me to, sort of direction I was going with, and encouraged me, or sometimes would challenge me or hold me accountable, which I found quite annoying at the time and quite difficult. But I think I stand to benefit in the long term. I've stood to benefit. But there have been some people that have played that kind of part in my life. Probably my mum, to be quite frank, is the most kind of influential person in my life. Yeah, my mum and my dad actually, rest his soul, kind of had that consistently challenging me, consistently calling me out, unashamedly calling me out and putting me under the microscope every now and then. Not too much to leave me demoralized, but just enough to keep me, to keep me with the heat under my feet. Didn't burn, didn't cook, but just kept me simmering, always trying to better myself or strive or move in a certain direction.
Yeah, that sort of
Yeah.
sense of just like slightly unsettled, just to sort of keep pushing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
exactly
and
that.
and and the reason why you went into law, what was the story behind that?
Oh yeah, so that comes back to Malcolm X. I think in school I was always a person that liked to debate. I had an older brother that went to grammar school, and I was the one that didn't have. I possibly had the brains to go to grammar school, right? But not the academic pedigree. He was like well behaved, and he went to grammar school. But I was a sort of bright but naughty one. Oh, the one that never. The report says could work harder, could do better, could just averaging out. And so as an older sibling, you kind of always aspire. So I'd always want to debate with him. And, this guy studied chemistry and Greek and Latin and all these classical subjects at grammar school. And I was just felt a bit full of myself as a younger sibling. Like I could match him intellect for intellect. Let's go at it. So he's quite older than me, actually, quite a few years older than me. But we would always have this debates and arguments about all kind of stuff. I remember that as a child. And so there was that I was a very talkative person as the youngest of the siblings. You kind of like grow up and you have to find a way to get attention, right? Or find a way to fit in. And I'm the youngest, so I worked hard at that. Very humorous, comedy type personality as a child, and I'm very driven to be a part of the mix. And so that's where my argumentation came from. And so when I read Malcolm X, and that had, and his story had, his narrative had quite an impact on me. And I always remember him saying that he wanted to be a lawyer. And I used to watch TV and watch, a lot of the politicians were lawyers. I said, why are they all lawyers? Come from a law background. What's the connection? They're not graduates of politics. They're graduates of law. And then, so it's the kind of link between law and politics, and this kind of formulating your arguments and constructing your arguments and challenging people's arguments. So that was a kind of like attraction for the law side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a quite adversarial ethos in the whole structure in law, particularly, the higher up you go. And I mean, I sort of relate to you, because if you don't become, say, naughty, or you don't have an argument, you're just you disappear from the minds of even family members.
Yeah.
You've got to ruffle the feathers.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's only now when I look back and process what I was doing, that's the kind of conclusion I come to, analyzing my motivations. Almost like retrospectively, it's like I'm saying, I've had to find a way to matter, to be important, to be noticed. Was it narcissistic or elements of it? Probably not in a clinical sense, but just in at least the Greek mythos sense of a bit, full of myself. Yeah, I'll own that. I'll own that as a younger sibling. Yeah.
And when did the kind of penny drop and you thought to yourself, I mean, what was there a particular sort of story or incident that happened when you were studying law that you thought, no, this isn't going to work?
No, it was more a series of circumstances that I had applied to. When I left university, I was still interested in becoming a lawyer, and actually went and studied politics for a year because I had not applied to law school in time. And then within that time, I had a family crisis, and it impacted my career chance or choices, or what direction I was going to go in. And I had kind of like not jumped into the real job market in a sense. I was just working, helping a friend run his emerging business, but because it gave me all the flexibility I needed, and because of my family, the needs of my family, I could I'm not going to work today. I don't want to work for 2 days, and this type of thing. And I could be busy right now, and so it's that suited the family situation that I was going through, but my career didn't launch. And then it got to a point where I said, look, I need to jump onto the literal formal job market. And there was an opportunity going at Feltham, and working in safeguarding, and I had no idea what safeguarding was, and I never worked with anybody that was suicidal or self-harm or anything of this nature. But being from South London, born in Brixton, you kind of grow up with that mentality that, like, if you say you can do it, you can do it. It's a tall order, but is it look like a good job with prospects? You just come out of uni, like, all right, it's not the same subjects, but I mean, let's do this. We can work with that the kind of clientele that was at that hotel, if I can put it that way. So like, I'll be able to do it. I was like in for a rude awakening when I actually did start the job, and I thought to myself, what have I signed up for? I'm well over my head. But I kept on splashing around and kept going at it until I found out, hey, I'm actually swimming. I'm not going to drown. But the feeling of drowning and being overwhelmed and being well in over your head, yeah, that was in the early stages. It was a big ask, and I was feeling the pace initially. Yeah.
What happened on the first day?
The first days, the easy days of shadowing and just walking around and saying hi to people and stuff like that. Not really an issue, but it was when my manager at the time, he took off these things you have when you ride your bike, and
the stabilizers.
The stabilizers. When he took off the stabilizers, and I would stabilize no more. It was kind of like go on the wings and kind of like mix and speak to the guys, and this person at risk, and check in with this person. And yeah, there was one person I needed to check in with, and when he actually said, he asked a famous question that we're all so scared to kind of like ask when we're not familiar with working in the areas of suicide and self-harm is, do you want to end your life or do you want to kill yourself or something like that? And when he said yes, categorically I do, yeah, it freaked me out. That freaked me the hell out. And that was, but I think that was a crystallization of it all, because I think that was like the baptism of fire, if I could put it that way, because kind of panicked, but went for support, but in a kind of long, in the overall long story of that incident, it gave me maybe the shaking up that I needed, like to, say, okay, this is what it can be like. And these are the steps that you need to do if these things happen. Because there's so much training you can do. There's so much filling in forms and the paperwork and the 215 and the 512 and it's this subsection here. It's all that is good, and role playing conversations are good, but until the rubber hits the road when you are out on the front line, boom, in the room, and you have to have those conversations, have those interactions, and it can go any way. That's the real development, right? That's the real learning. That's when it's really happening. And so yeah, that's what I was stabilized were off, and that's where I was. And from there, it was difficult, but I don't think I look back. That particular incident will always stay with me as long as I've got a memory. As long as my memory serves me well, then I'll always retain that particular. Lots of different things happened there over the 9 years I worked there, but that was the first time somebody had said anything. I'd heard that, and it just had a kind of impact on me.
Yeah, I mean, the visceral experiences, you can never forget them compared to the
The body
theory.
remembers, right?
Yeah.
The body never forgets. The body never forgets. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a special kind of memory there. Were there any kind of sort of nice clients, I don't know what you call them over there, that sort of you got really on with, and it was like, yeah, I'm really enjoying this kind of thing?
Oh no, there were lots. To be quite frank, there were more clients that I found I built a good rapport with, got along with, found their stories fascinating, very insightful young men. And surprisingly, I say surprisingly, I mean, obviously working in that world, it stopped being a surprise. But my initial thoughts were like, these guys are all school dropouts, or they're all, not very bright guys, but there's some super smart guys. It's just that they chose, or life circumstances kind of corralled them into avenues where they use their intellect in sort of deviant or antisocial ways, or to crime, but to be a career criminal, which some of them were. There was a few hotheads who just were in custody for confrontation and risk poor kind of like impulse control. But I'd separate those from the kind of astute who violence only begets violence, but we will use violence, absolute violence, when necessary to maintain business, but not for just being angry for angry's sake. They don't have an anger management problem, but they're very calculated guys. Some of these guys were like really intelligent guys, really super clever guys that, they knew about distribution, about risk assessment, about security. And they didn't always articulate it in those words, but when they were talking about things, they're in a tight space. I guess they felt there was something that they could trust. They would just, talk about life and incidents, things that are going on. Like I said, it wasn't direct. Initially, I wasn't directly counselling them. It was more sort of stress management. And I've maybe there's something about being locked in a room potentially for 23 hours of the day, and then you ask to speak to somebody just to get out of your room, and they will take you out of the room and maybe go in another room, but it's not the small box that you're in, with more glass, and it's lit up, and the person seems warm. So they were more than happy to kind of like share their stories with me about whatever. And it was a kind of another education for me.
In terms of getting rid of your judgments and sort of preconceived ideas.
No, definitely. And just learning so much about the underworld or the street world or the other side of the train track, that I'm kind of like, I'm not a choir boy, but I made an effort from a certain age to sort of, I grew up in an area where lots of people that were from, chose to dabble on that side of the track, but kind of, background I'm from, parents, it was almost like we went near to the train track, but we never crossed over. We all got people that we grew up with, close friends and associates that we go back. that maybe jumped over the other side of the trade tracks, so always kept an association, but never really ventured into that world.
So you became more fascinated about it.
Yeah, because it was almost like a world I could relate to, but not having that knowledge, not having that. Let's say I might have known a few people who had an A level in that side of the track.
Yeah.
But these were some people that were on there. They were young men, but some of them were doing the degree course, or some of them were post grads in that world because they had been in that world from a very young age. That's one of the things that you learn is that you might meet somebody who's 20 years old, and you think, oh, or 19 years old. So we figure, right, they're a teenager, right, or they're just barely out of their 20s. So they're a young man. They might have been involved in a few things, but for only so long. But not really. Some of these guys have been involved in things of that nature since they got initiated in when they were like 12 and 13 by some older artists to be doing something for an older sibling, older cousin, somebody else. And they've been in that world and around those settings for like near 8 years, 9 years. And
Wow.
it's the kind of world that it makes people grow up very, on one level, it can make those involved in that world grow up very quickly. So there's an element that is very mature. And then there's another social aspect of that world that arrests people's development. So see them in their comfort zone and they're quite mature. And then take them outside of their comfort zone and social setting, and they can be quite goofy or quite, quite immature or just not adept,
Yeah. I mean, that's quite fascinating because it shows you that we've got a lot of facets to our being, and
Definitely, yeah. The human being is not one-dimensional. The human being is
yeah,
definitely not one. Very, very complex. That thing that we call the human being is very, very complex.
yeah, and sort of, you said that you were in front of this client who talked about suicide, and then that got you sort of interested in, the whole essentially psychotherapy world.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, with the psychologists that I'd heard over the years
Hmm.
that had garnered my interest, um, and having the opportunity to go and study counselling, that I think that was the real switch. But I was counselling in the loose sense of the word long before I ever went on a counselling course, because by the nature of the job that you do when you work in safeguarding, um, you hear people's stories, you speak to people, you listen to them, and sometimes in that listening to them, in some form or fashion, you help them to make sense of what's scrambling around in their head. When they're in a very tight corner, sometimes you have a young man who's 18 years old, or sometimes under 18, who has just been sentenced or just been convicted of murder, for example, and he doesn't know quite where the future's taking him, but he knows at least he will be in a surrounding like this for the next 12 years, absolute minimum. But will it be 12 or 14? Will it be 14 or 16? So when you're working with people like that, or who have just come back from the Old Bailey and have been told, like you will not be able to apply for parole for a minimum of 17 years. And when you're 17 years old, yeah, it gets real. So when you're asked to come and see that young person, or they phoned your officer, said, Smithy wants to have a word. He just come back from the Old Bailey. He's pretty bad. He got 17. And you go and open his door and take him out to speak. At that point, not being a trained counselor, but there is something taking place when helping that person to get to grips and come to terms with, what life has served up for them or what situation they found themselves in.
And then doing the course, what kind of sort of system really helped you?
Um, I think the person-centered modality was really the bedrock of my practice. So when I studied counselling at diploma level, we covered like REBT, and we covered cognitive therapy with Bex, and then rational emotive behavior therapy with Albert Ellis, and we covered a lot of person-centered with Rogers, existential, some Gestalt, However, the default setting was always person-centered.
And for the non-psychologists out there listening to this, what do you mean by person-centered?
Okay, so all right, so person-centered is a form of counseling, psychology, psychotherapy where um, there isn't a whole load of techniques and it's more of a non-directive form of counseling where the counselor essentially responds to what the client brings, and the main thing that the counselor is trying to do is to extend what they call the core conditions. Just basically, counsel trying to be genuine. They're trying to extend like a lot of empathy towards a client, and the aim is to do that in a way that is non-judgmental. Really, essentially, they're not leading and they're not judgmental, and they're just being in that certain space. And it's quite a profound form of therapy. It can be quite frustrating for some clients. It can be quite frustrating for some practitioners, and there's many roads to Damascus, so it doesn't suit all. But I've found that as much as I've learned different modalities, and I went off to do a master's in REBT, cognitive behavior therapy, I actually still think that person-centered is like my default setting. So if I use to stall, I use existential, I use cognitive therapy or REBT, former CBT, and even some transactional analysis ideas. I might be influenced and informed by a whole load of different ideas, but I find that if the client work I'm finding it extremely difficult, I just naturally resort to a person-centered modality to almost recalibrate before I may come up with another strategy, or before I say, okay, I can maybe change the modality and use different techniques. And the next, I found out some vital information that now enables me to want to go in a certain direction. But yeah, when the work is very intense, very difficult, maybe stuck, I can always find myself, without even giving it a second thought, going back into person-centered.
And that's in a way sort of coming back to yourself again, going back inside within you and listening to what's talking inside of you in a way.
Mm-hmm. 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 Beauty of person-centered is it relies heavily on your sixth sense, your intuition, your gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as human beings, we have, I guess in the modern world, or at least in the Western society, we not discredited, I don't know if that's the right word, but just kind of, ignored, just not listened to, like first our intuition, our gut feelings, and our imagination, we can the power of fantasies and stuff like that. Actually, there's a way of utilizing those. That can be very rich, and we sometimes miss out on those. So yeah, it doesn't give us all the answers. There's nothing to say that being rational and is not, they're not either or, but it's just that we shouldn't ignore our gut feelings, because I've always found 99% of the time that it's played out in some ways. It's been proven right, or been proven, if not correct, but relevant. Let me put it that way. That something that my gut feeling told me doesn't mean I'm absolutely 100% correct. I could find out that I was incorrect, but by telling me, by me experiencing that and being in tune and actually being aware of that, it still informed me in some kind of way.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think. I mean, I say I think, but I'm not trying to think. That's the thing. And but I mean, we grew up in this sort of whole science of science, where science is the dominant religion, so to speak, and that's all very rational. But we forget that we have this special superpower, which we can't put our finger on, but we can definitely feel it. Being
Mm-hmm.
around other people and sort of other things and just other concepts and other ways of other constructs and narratives. I mean, the person that kind of brought me towards that was really C.G. Jung. The importance of dreams and fantasies and clairvoyancy and the the irrationality of being and the absurdity of being as well, within a relatively scientific construct. There is some framework there, but it's not too rigid. I mean, we know what rigid constructs are like. Being scientists and being therapists. There is a path that we can go down, but at the same token, you do need to come, go off the path, the well-trodden path.
Yeah, yeah. I'd agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you're quite popular with the ladies now, I heard.
Is that right? Is that right? Possibly, but for the reasons of my podcast, I take it in that context. Yeah, I do a podcast of It Takes Two.
Yeah.
On my channel Hugh Mayers TV, and I've been speaking lately on a lot of different platforms, and it's been like a lot of ladies who are hosting all these different platforms and forums and IG Live, and with all these different thousands of followers and stuff like that that I've just been gifted to speak on. But I think can I say love is in the air? Like, I mean, so it's important. Romantic, intimate relationships, marriage, these things they're always relevant, so relevant. People are either, in a long term, was just out of a long term, hoping to get into a long term, or just had a one night stand, or hoping to get a one night stand, or so there's always something going on in that department, so people tend to find it quite interesting, and women love, right? So
Yep, they do. Yeah. It's a very it's very enticing for them. It's very enticing for us, and then we all meet in the middle.
Absolutely, yeah, win-win. It's a win-win.
But yeah, I mean, it's good, but at the same token, it's sort of bad, or there's a lot of conflict there. There's a lot of issues that go on in this. So it is a big challenge, but that's never changed. It'll always be there. There's nothing special about this particular time that makes these things super challenging. It's always been challenging.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are speaking about the lockdown, but I mean, has it created something that wasn't there, or did it just speed it up, sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it speeds up or slows it down. It's always been an issue of discussion, enjoyment, pain, hurt. All the emotions are there. So I mean, it's sort of, but for some reason, you've got that kind of thing with the ladies. There's something there about that. What do you think?
No, I'm going to take your word for that. I'm going to take your word for that.
Where do you think that comes from?
How do you mean? Could you elaborate?
I don't know. I mean, you've got the switch, mate. There's a switch there.
Oh, in that sense. No, I'm genuinely not sure, but I just think that I have a lot of.
Is it the glasses? Is it the glasses? Is it the haircut?
I'm harmless. Yeah, is it the harmless? No, I actually just think that like possibly I may find it. There's a side. I don't want to say I'm in touch with my feminine side, but I just feel like I can connect with women.
Yeah.
I just can connect with women. I don't think I've allowed and I am somebody that pushes weights, and I'm into the whole alpha, actually I hate that word alpha, but I'm into the masculine men thing, but I still don't allow that to, it doesn't give me an inability. That side doesn't give me an inability to connect with women in a profound way, or some women at least, so yeah, I think I can strike a chord.
Yeah, I mean, you don't pull your punches when it comes to masculinity, and you're not someone who would mince his words when it comes to masculinity and sort of tread carefully. You say it like it is, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the feminine side of things, like that sort of opposite attraction.
Possibly, because what I've discovered as I've matured is that how much women appreciate um, honesty, authenticity, how much they, how much women or many women really value that. So, that's just me as a person trying to be authentic as best as I can and be integral.
And
You know,
apart from yourself, any other sort of male authentic individuals that you want us to sort of look towards and learn more from?
um, there are. I've had many teachers, and I mean, not people necessarily I've sat with, but even like spiritually, I mean, religion plays a central part for myself, spirituality, and I know we live in an era of secularism, but spirituality feeds me, and Islam is very relevant in my life, and there are many people in the Islamic narrative that are important, but at the center of it all, in terms of human beings, is the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So that's a man amongst men. So
And he had a lot of wives. He had a lot of
absolutely,
wives, and
absolutely.
I don't know how he did it. How do you think he did it? What was his sort of three main um, pillars or bedrocks that sort of allowed him to be the man that he was amongst so many
Um,
wives?
I would probably I'm gonna use my layman because I'm no spiritual teacher, but I would say that his deep connection with God, his spirituality as a bedrock. I think that his integrity as a person, like his honesty and his character, but also um, he's quite sensitive. He was a quite sensitive person, quite a sensitive person. So that's strength, but with a sensitivity combination possibly gave him that ability, because they say that some of the Meccans, I think some of the history books say some of the Meccans would deride him and say that he does effeminate things because he was kind to children, or getting up and giving his seat to his daughter and things of this nature when in public gatherings, and so those were taboos in that society. But I think those things were part of his absolute strength. You know.
Is that something that we can develop for ourselves or for the younger men in today's society? Is that something that's important?
I think so. I got very strong feelings about that. I teach, some disaffected young men from the inner cities on a mentoring scheme, a rites of passage type of scheme, and one of there's modules about visionary goal setting and being self determination, all these different goals, aims, aspirations. However, respect for womanhood is pivotal, and it shouldn't, you know. In this era where sometimes it seems like there's a gender war going on, we as men shouldn't feel demeaned in any way or like we lose anything by having respect for womanhood. And doesn't mean not holding women accountable or the women can do no wrong, but it generally means like not having that as best as we can, that sexism in us, that kind of misogyny in us, or challenging ourselves, questioning ourselves, open to that, open to kind of like question where some of our motivations or behaviors have come from, some of our values, some of our views and perspectives, not to be afraid of that, to question that.
Yeah. There is a bigger narrative that's sort of telling us one thing, but it's important to have our own internal compass or narrative that gives us something that allows us um, to move forward and to be inspired and transform into something that's beneficial for society, which isn't always celebrated, in sort of mainstream media, really.
Hardly ever.
Yeah, yeah.
Hardly ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's a short podcast today. What kind of advice would you have given yourself, growing up as a teenager in South London? What would be your three top tips you would have given yourself back then?
Three top tips. Three top tips. Wow, that's a really good question. First one that comes to mind is to be a little bit more thick-skinned. I think as a teenager, I was like most teenagers, but very sensitive to other people's views, opinions on myself as I was finding myself. So I would be encouraging a younger me to be a little bit more thick-skinned, to believe in myself more, because that's the only way you kind of develop your confidence is to just, believe in yourself. And I think the other thing would be to forgive myself. Forgive myself, because we do, at least I did, and still do sometimes, chastise ourselves heavily for our errors. And, it's just like we learn to forgive other people and let it go. Yeah, I think it would be beneficial to learn how to forgive, let go. Hey, that was a mistake. As one of my young scholars said today, I don't allow what happened yesterday to have to determine how I feel today. In the context of, if something negative happened yesterday, hey, that was yesterday. It's a new day, new opportunity. Let's keep it moving. And I think, yeah, I would give myself that advice.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How can people get hold of you? Do you have sort of organizations or
Yeah,
websites or?
I got an organization called my private practice called Emotional Insight Consultancy. So if anybody wants to put that in the engine, Emotional Insight, they should be able to get my contact details. Or if they put Hugh Mayers in Facebook, I'm on Facebook as well. So with all my contact details, I post videos, and if anybody wants to reach out on Messenger or anything like that, for any to contact me, then yeah, by all means.
And the podcast as well.
Yes, yes. And the podcast is there. Hugh Mayers TV. It Takes Two is a flagship, but there's a few other bits and pieces, interesting bits and pieces up there from radio interviews and other platforms as well.
Hugh, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you today, and keep going with the ladies, as they say.
Dr. Heidi, you're gonna get me in trouble. You're gonna get me in trouble. But no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the invite. It's a very, very thought provoking for myself, actually, some questions you posed. So yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you so much.